Today I welcome Eyal Weizman to our HKW talk on the Anthropocene. Eyal Weizman is professor at Goldsmiths College. He is director of the Center for Research Architecture. Welcome, Eyal.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
One marker of our time is the speed of construction as well as on destruction. When you look at the financial crisis, how many dollars were burned, so to say, in this crisis. When you look at Fukushima, you see the force, the energy of destruction processes.
Yeah.
For us at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, these signifiers are not only signifiers for quantitative change, but also for qualitative changes. Mm-hmm. And the Anthropocene project we developed is for us a kind of conceptual frame to raise issues related to this transformation process. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, also your Forensis project at the Goldsmiths College is a project which tries to develop new conceptual approaches, in this case, to legal issues. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could develop a little bit what is the basic idea, where does this term forensis come from?
So the idea of forensis is really a stage in the development of research at the Center for Research Architecture, and also my own research for several years, which are really to do with reading transformation in the built environment, natural and built environment. So that is very much the beginning, and somehow I think it connects very well to your idea of construction and destruction. Because while looking at conflict, and initially the kind of conflicts I was looking at were in Israel-Palestine, and looking at them very much from an architectural perspective, I have realized that the very ontological difference between construction and destruction does not really exist when you need to analyze the relationship between politics and form, politics and transformation. What you really see is political reality accelerated by conflict, accelerated very much by armed conflict, that is reorganizing the material reality. Whether a road is a destruction or construction, we do not know. It is the reorganization of matter across the terrain. Of course, things, when they're experienced by a person, could be seen as destruction. When your home is destroyed, it is destruction, of course. But it is also the creation of a new reality, a new physical and political reality. And it was really in trying to take political account of the transformation of the built environment, that always including both construction and destruction, that the concept of forensis has emerged.
Quite a number of these processes are triggered by states you are dealing with.
Yeah.
And you are dealing with them from, let's say, bottom-up perspective.
Yeah.
What kind of role do artistic and scientific strategies play in this research? Because you are working together with quite a number of artists, you involve scientists in these processes. What role do they play?
Yeah. So, I mean, the kind of experiment that Forensis, the project, is really the idea of multidisciplinary work between scientists, artists, political theorists, architects, not as a kind of a put together of minds, but an engagement in a project. And in order to engage in a project, one needs sometimes a sort of an organizing aim for that work together. And for example, building prosecution files, in one of the instances of the articulation of our work. We work for lawyers and prosecutors or for political organizations, and we build files that are supposed to perform in the public domain. We realize that to make a case, you cannot separate the scientific work as that which produces the knowledge and the kind of artistic sensibility as that which presents that knowledge, but that the collaboration starts much further upstream. The very aesthetic choices and scientific ones are entangled in a way that the research is built from the very beginning.
Could you give an example in which way this working together of scientific and aesthetic strategies take place?
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, I think that to understand that, we need to go back to what we perceive as what is the aesthetic at all.
Yes.
And for us, aesthetics in a forensic context is prior to all questions of human judgment. The aesthetics initially, that which pertains to the senses,
yes,
in a very classical meaning, is to look at materials as senses. It's the sensorial capacity of matter, whether it is a large landscape, and we are reading in that example.
Is it the sensorial capacity of matter or the sensorial capacity of human beings in relation to matter?
Well, this is obviously kind of entangled, but I would say that the first layer of what we call the forensic aesthetics is to understand that all matter in the world is a sensor. In the same way that we were thinking or developing in the 19th century the photographic process, and silver salt particles start registering as image the way in which they saturated in the world, the way in which they respond to light and reflection. I think that now in our position now in the 21st century, we can see all surfaces as if they were both presence and representation. Every bit of material reality register its relation in the world. We just need to know how to read it. But that form of reading is both scientific and aesthetic, because the second layer of the forensic...
Would you say on a conceptual level, this, because we are speaking also about in which way conceptual transformations are taking place today, that this conceptual approach you are taking is also reconceptualize the way we look at matter.
Yes.
Because matter becomes to some extent a protagonist in the forensic theater.
Yes, I mean, it's exactly the case. And I think that when you look at, I think the example of theater is fantastic. And although much of what we deal with is very tragic in nature, the actual theatrical genre we work with is comedy. Comedy is there where matter speaks, where objects participate with people, where the kind of the conventions of the world are kind of undone to a particular sense. The moments of Hamlet speaking to the skull might be part of a tragedy, but it's a comic moment in the classic genre of comedy.
But quite a number of examples you use also in your talks, one gets the idea that it is human, that these are human beings who get matter to speak.
Yes.
So the matter does not speak by itself, but there are agents for the matter in the theater.
Yeah, there's probably two ways to put it. You can say that matter speaks for human, that who is ventriloquizing whom? I mean, is the material world using us as puppet because we have the capacity to speak in order to speak through us? Or do we animate, as in give human characteristics or living characteristic to non-organic matter? And I think exactly that ambivalence is very interesting. Because when you look at all matter as sensors, as that being the first layer of the forensic aesthetics, we need to understand the second and the third layer. The second and the third layer are the way in which the sensorial capacity of matter is starting to be performed. And is starting to be performed, exactly like you said, through its translators, through its moderators. Somebody that speaks both the language of matter and the language of humans.
And here scientists may come in as protagonists in the theater.
It is exactly the scientist as that translator, the translator that speaks to understand the language of matter, or at least understand it in her or his own way, and is able to articulate a claim on the basis of it. But the minute that we put the scientist and the material in the context of the forum, we have the third layer of the forensic aesthetic.
Let's stay with the scientist. Can you give an example in which way scientists bring in their knowledge into this process in order to get matter to speak?
So, I mean, I think that at least in the first instant of our research, we were looking at human remains. And we were looking at the entry of scientists into a field in which from which science was initially excluded.
Yes.
And that was very important to see that moment of emergence of a scientific discourse in the field of human rights. Yeah. So human rights, traditionally, is something that is very much connected to human testimony, to memory, to experience, to trauma, and not only epistemologically. When human rights activists go to the field and speak to survivors, it is not only in order to know what happened, it is part of the very ethics and a kind of a new politics of compassion, identification, etc. At some moment, and we were showing it in the exhibition that we put here in the house, scientists enter in the mid-80s to answer a very specific problem, and that is the problem of absence, the disappeared people of Argentina and Chile. And it is scientists that enter into a field that is somewhat averse to science. It doesn't like science. It's a field which is very human-based, and at that moment there is an aesthetic transformation, because at that moment the scientist and the forensic anthropologists or medical doctors, etc., enter into field and need to re-articulate the scientific discovery to two types of audience, both to judges who are not the peer review, normal peer review kind of forum, and to the public.
Basically, now we are coming to this third level you were addressing before. Is normally science, the task of science is to objectify the world. And now, since they are in this theater, they have to reanimate the objects.
Yeah. So it's exactly that comedic moment of forensics. And it's hard to understand it, it's a comedy, but it's absolutely need to be insisted upon. The forum is not simply a site of presentation, it is a site of debate. Science does not enter as it speaks in one voice. It always speaks in two voices, at least in that forum, and sometimes in many more. So you have scientists confronting scientists, and each one animates the matter in her or his own way to build her or his case, defense or prosecution, etc. And the judges, which is in cases of international law and human rights, is always political. It's always beyond the juridical, technical juridical forum there. Has to be kind of convinced by scientists that have to be performers. Scientists become comedians, or scientists become like some kind of, sort of fighting within this arena of the law. And that necessitates a different conception of science. It is not, it is not science that is there as a kind of positivistic, as a fixed reality. It is always up to debate. The methodology of each one of the scientists is always up to scrutiny, and you do not know who to believe.
I mean, you bring up science in the public arena.
Yeah.
It's not just amongst the experts, but they have to address in a non-scientific language other people.
Yeah.
And that transformation itself, the theater starts.
It's exactly the case. There's a great example of one of the most interesting debates that I've seen in the context of international law. It's a debate between Milosevic in the ICTY, that's the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. We have it in the exhibition. And Milosevic represents himself, and he's confronted with an architectural art historian called Andras Schrielmeier at the ICTY. And they're confronted with a number of photographs that Andras has brought of ruins of mosques in Kosovo. And you see that each one is animating that rubble, the same rubble in a different way, telling different story. Of course, Milosevic's story would be to say that that is a result of a bombing by NATO, and because his agenda was to accuse NATO of most violation. He was right in some instances, but not in this one. And that an architectural historian was reading and animating the matter with a different thing. And you would see Milosevic actually entering into the very qualification of that person. He's saying, why art history? He says, you're an art historian, a librarian. How can you speak on behalf of this rubble? Surely we need ballistic engineers or structural engineers. Although it is exactly an art historian that could speak on behalf of mosques, of their materiality, and locate matter in history in a very different way. Art history has always been a kind of one of the ways by which artworks and architectural things are speaking to us throughout history. But here what was interesting, and the shift that was absolutely fascinating at that instant, was that it was not the intention of the builder that was grafted onto the form of the stones, on the engraving of the stones, but the stones with which the mosque was constructed were now part of the quarry from where they have come from. Yeah. Their brittleness or solidity, the structural foundation, etc., etc. So, in a sense, matter took on another kind of discourse and performed very differently in this court.
We are to some extent already quite close to the Anthropocenic issues I wanted to raise.
Yeah.
You are tackling also more and more complex cases where you have kind of intermingling of natural forces and human action. I mean, our world, and this is basically the approach of our Anthropocenic project, is that you cannot separate anymore natural causes from human actions in the way we did that before. For example, people are using cars and they produce carbon dioxide that is changing climate. The glaciers are melting, that is producing the rising of the sea, and that again interferes in architecture, urban constructions next to the sea. So we have a whole circulation of action, causal reactions by nature, where it becomes very difficult to pinpoint actorship, which produces, let's say, social conflicts, political conflict, and so on. Perhaps you can go into this in a bit more detailed way, in which, with forensics approaches, you can tackle this more complex theater of human and natural interactions.
Yeah, no, I think this is exactly where the shift from forensics to forensis makes sense. Because when the Romans, I mean, forensis is a Latin term, and it was used by the Romans to refer to those things pertaining to the forum. When they articulated that word, they did not mean the court initially, but a much more complex public domain in which humans and non-humans interact and are exchanged. It's a space of economy and politics. And that opening up of the forum to both beyond the juridical to human, to non-human actors, is, I think, absolutely essential for the move between criminal law, even criminal law in the context of international law, and environmental issues. Because here you have not only the forum need to enlarge, but the very roles of perpetrator and victim are now diffused to many lines or many actors in there. I'll give you two examples. and one perhaps on a smaller scale, and another one on the larger scale. On the smaller scale, there was a very interesting case that was being brought to the Israeli Supreme Court of a Palestinian village in Jerusalem, that cracks began to appear in the buildings of those Palestinian families. And you know, it was thought as a kind of structural issue, and surveyors came and checked those cracks. And what was discovered was that effectively, if you think about the very sort of material composition of Jerusalem, it's built upon, the bedrock is a lime rock. There is a layer of aggregate earth. Always buildings are built onto this aggregate earth. So this is where the foundations are, and there the buildings are above. Every seismic crack or seismic movement in the rock is then absorbed by the layer of aggregate earth and is not transferred to the building. What happened in this particular case was that Israel, or Israeli archaeologists, were digging right under the Palestinian neighborhood and taking away the layer of aggregate earth. Then seismic movements shot directly up the columns and cracked it. So if you think about following that crack, let's see what it passed through. It went from the walls of the interior, bedrooms, etc., into the columns. It went into roadworks and sidewalks. Always, you know, a crack translates force contradiction into a line of least resistance. Then it goes into the earth, it goes into geology, it goes further down. So if you follow the crack, you cannot think in terms of architecture, urbanism, geology, archaeology, right? The crack is just moving through all this kind of epistemic frame, and for the crack, the building is a rock. I mean, it would move through the limestone and the granite, looking for the lines where the force contradiction, where the matter is not held, and perhaps where mineral concentration is a bit denser, that this is where it would crack through the stone. It would go through the column, and it would find exactly where cigarette butt was thrown 50 years ago by the builder. So it's really moving and connecting all these layers of materiality, and the legal problem has to deal now with geology, archaeology, urbanism, and architecture. And of course, the court was unable to do that. They can understand also you've done something, you know, and this is the direct consequence.
But they are not blaming the crack as a crack.
Well, the crack is, I mean, that would be, to bring the crack to court would be probably the next step in what we could do in constructing these kind of new forms. But a crack is a non-object. A crack is simply the line of force contradiction. But the forces, if you think about them, they are economical, they are of political nature, they are of colonial nature, they are of, you know, the materiality. All those issues are kind of put together within that thing, and the court need to render a decision, and you know, the fuse burns of that court. Now, another example that I said we can discuss was to do with the Commission for Forensic Architecture. That's the kind of the institute that we are running. You know, we're not only researching forensics, we've established an institute that provides services to, you know, to court, both architects, artists, theorists, etc., to intervene in the legal process to do with the destruction of the Ixil Maya people in Guatemala, in the highlands. And that is really the last, let's say, people call it the last Indian War. It's the last war in which, so the last Indian frontier, no? The colonization of America, the almost kind of the last bastion of indigenous autonomy on the Ixil mountain, and people from the coast, of course, the military and the state went up there. And that was declared by the Truth Commission in Guatemala as a genocide. But the idea was that then emerges what constitutes genocide, and how do we think about about genocide, which is the intentional destruction of a protected group, whether it is an ethnic group or religious group or national group. And they've realized that for years the kind of thinking about genocide was the counting of dead bodies, how many people died, and how can we connect the evidence that we see, i.e. we dig out skulls with holes in the head measuring 5.56 millimeter to the gun that shoot 5.56 millimeter bullet, i.e. from the victim directly to the perpetrator. But that missed an enormous amount of information in understanding war, because also in that particular attack on the mountain, that particular genocide, most people that died did not die of bullets or machete wounds. They died because the environmental conditions of the high shield mountain have been transformed. So with Paulo Tavares, we started a process that we said, let's look now at other realities of the transformation of that area during the time of the time that was in question in court, and see the transformation of the natural and built environment. And we've been able to measure and identify several very important transformations. Deforestation. The forest was not the kind of the nature other, the natural other to where the Ixil Maya villages were. It was actually a kind of a garden for them. It was an anthropogenic site. It was produced, it was full of fruit trees, etc. And by the destruction of the forest, what was destroyed was the condition that enabled life in a particular place. Other species changed. The species of maize changed from one to the other as the colonizer went up on the hill and kind of transformed the whole agricultural industry from collective commons to private field. It kind of liberalized. And you would see that that transformation was a transformation in natural and built environment. And then Paulo Tavares came up with this absolutely, I think, breakthrough idea, and also in his work that is presented here with archaeologists, and saying archaeology is not only about the remnants of buildings or what is crafted by humans, pottery, etc., but the forest itself, the composition of the forest itself, is archaeology. If you look at the age of the forest, at the type of vegetation in it, it registers human movement through it. It registered settlements that were there.
I think this is a wonderful example in which way, let's say, natural processes and human actions are really creating, so to say, crime, a crime case. But related to the Anthropocene discussion, of course, one can see that also on a much larger scale. I mean, this is still quite a local, regional context. When you look at climate change as one of the major discussions in the context of the Anthropocene transformation, then the globe becomes itself, so to say, the object of this transformation.
Absolutely.
And I think in this context, it's interesting to look at what instruments we have to produce global order, and what effectively what instruments we use in order to produce global destructions. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
I think from there is a fantastic work in the exhibition by Adrian Lahoud, which exactly deal with that issue, and it is to do with the effect of the desertification of the Sahel. So we know that the Darfur crisis is part of a number of violent conflicts that are happening along this latitudinal line. And as the Sahara creeps southwards, areas that were arable land, agricultural land, are disappearing. There's a great pressure on land that leads to, from Mali to northern Ethiopia through Chad and Sudan, to a series of conflicts. Of course, in the West, our response to these conflicts are to prosecute those people that produce atrocities across that band. But what produced that desertification in the first place? And when you bring those things into the equation, then you see that aerosol emission and other kind of pollutants produced mainly in the West, not in these countries that are very much the victim of climate change, but not the perpetrators of climate change, are so the kind of the whole instrument of international justice, the ICC, that takes all this this great interest in Africa and atrocities produced in Africa, has outside of its frame, of its analytical frame, what is actually most important here. What is the root cause of this violence? And when you go into the root cause, again, you can never trace a straight line. You're moving into understanding of a particular situation of material reality that is produced through a number of forces and their interaction on various scales. On the local scale, on how ethnic tension is actually aggravated by these pressures. On the global change, about discussion around how many degrees are we allowing the Earth to warm? 2 degrees in Europe will have a very different effect, as Adrian is showing there, than in Africa, where that would lead to the destruction of the livelihood of millions of people across that band. So we must know. It seems to me that we are in a situation right now where our science is at one place. It can describe very complicated processes. Yes. Our politics and legal tools are myopic because they can only look at very small parts of them. And this is where the most important aspect of forensics, that is the construction of forum, is absolutely necessary. We need to know how to build new political forums that combine science, politics, conflict analysis, together with our understanding of aesthetic tools and the use in that. And this is why we understand that to read the past, we need to construct the new institutions that could do that.
There's one last point I really would like to explore with you. Is the object of forensics normally are cases of destruction, of criminal intervention. But at the same time, forensics has a constructing attitude on several levels. On the one side, it reconstructs the situation, but it brings also the individuals affected by the action into a new interplay with each other, so that a reconstruction in the consciousness of the people, on the individuals, takes place, but also on the community level. Can you perhaps say something to that?
I think that our interest in violence is to do with our political commitment, but I think the claim is much larger than that. We think that forensics, or forensis, is a great model for science because it brings science into conflict. It sees science as a conflictual thing. It sees science as a performative and as an aesthetic production.
And an actor, social actor.
And as a social actor in the kind of the shaping of the world. This is not simply about addressing reality's past. As I mentioned before, the act of forensics is the act of constructing forums. We assemble forums around the evidence, around the issues that are at stake, around the issues that are debated. In international law, it is always that the forum gathers around the problem, around the evidence, and that is the first level of construction that takes place. Now, within the very tools that we are using, we need to understand that to analyze destruction and construction, this is again, it's not only about looking at the ruins. You need to assemble something together. In the example of the drone strikes, we use, again, a very classic Roman technique, which was called the art of memory. Roman orators like Cicero and Quintilian, when they had to deliver lectures which were 7 hours long in Rome, constructed in their mind a very complex building. Imagine a building like this, like the House of World Culture. And in each one of the foyers or room or stairwells or corridors, they've placed an object. And this object referred to a subject that they wanted to speak about, whether it's a fountain, was a naval battle, a dagger, a battle, a bad, maybe a love affair or something like that. And then they walked through the building. They could take different paths through it as the speech is constructed. The construction of the bringing back of memory, and in our case, the memory of the most traumatic moment in somebody's life, is requiring an architectural construction, even if it is imaginary or it's a digital or algorithmic reality. It is something that reconstitutes memory that is in fragments.
And it's interesting because this process is an inner process as well as an external process. The external process is you reconstruct either in a 3D model or in an image the situation, but at the same time you reconstruct it in the consciousness of the person.
Yes. Absolutely. So in a traumatic event, your memory and your life are in fragments. You need to reconstitute that reality, and sometimes you can be successful to greater or lesser degree, sometimes using architectural techniques. Yes. But what you reconstitute is also another bond. And it's a bond that is very important for us with the kind of political commitment that we come at the Forensis project, both on the level of climate change, on the level of conflict analysis, etc. And that is the social bond, the reconstitution of communities, the reconstitution of solidarity between people from nations such as us that are the perpetrators of violence across many places worldwide, especially as we're here in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and those communities whose lives were shattered by that. And that's a kind of a bond that is absolutely essential and gives meaning to the kind of scientific, aesthetic experiment that Forensis is.
Thank you very much, Eyal. It's wonderful to have you here, to have your project here. I think it's a wonderful project also for the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, because it brings out exactly the task the Haus is taking on at the moment in using scientific, aesthetical strategies to intervene in social, political discourses. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been absolutely a great experience working here.
Great.